We're going to record this meeting. I hope that's okay for everyone, but that way we can share it with folks who might not have been able to make it today. But thank you all for joining us. My name is Brandon Riley. I'm the Capital Projects Manager at the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. And we are here to, as part of the development activities meeting being hosted by Point Breeze organization, to present proposed entrance and signage improvements to Mellon Park, both sides of the park. We'll just dive right in. Just one kind request, if everyone could stay on mute, and if you have questions during the course of the presentation, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll have someone monitoring the chat so they can kind of stop me and I can, answer any questions. Otherwise, we'll have time at the end of the presentation to go over any questions you all have. So a brief agenda for what we wanted to cover tonight. We wanted to just do a quick review of the action plan, the Mellon Park action plan that the Conservancy led and developed in 2021 through ending in 2022, which kind of set this project up. So kind of just give you an overview of where we were and why we started with this project. We're then going to do kind of an overview of signage standards, because I think it's just kind of important to understand city signage and the types of things that you'll see. Then we'll walk through the proposed entrance improvements and signage treatments, what we're trying to do. And then, like I mentioned, we'll have time at the end for questions and discussion. So diving right in. So the Mellon Park Action Plan. As many of you, I see a lot of names I recognize from the various organizations in and around Mellon Park may recall, the Conservancy led an action planning process a year and a half ago that looked at both sides of the park. And the goal of the projects of the action plan was to identify kind of community-led, community-driven improvements that we wanted to see on both sides of the park. To really unify Mellon Park and to kind of set it up for its future and create a roadmap for implementation to a park that is well-loved and well-used. And part of that project established some general priorities for both sides of the park, which I can read through. But the ones that were mostly applicable to this project are bolded. So one of the top priorities coming out of the action plan was to improve and provide safe pedestrian and bicycle access to both sides of the park. Right now, Mellon Park is bifurcated by Fifth Avenue, which creates a physical barrier, but it's also kind of intuitively looks like two different places, two different spaces. We have the historic south side with historic ornate fences, the old buildings, the old mansion buildings, from various different owners that are now city owned. It has a totally different look and feel. A lot of people don't even realize it's a public park. And many people don't realize it's the same park as the park on the north side of Fifth Avenue, which has ball fields, basketball court, the tennis bubble. That has a bit more of an active recreation focus. Excuse me one moment. So that's something we were trying to fix, to resolve, is to make the park feel like the same park and to kind of connect it on both sides of Fifth Avenue. And to do that, one of the things that was identified and as a priority is providing more and better wayfinding and signage. Right now, on either side of Mellon Park, there is not much in terms of signage. There's no wayfinding signage. There's no map telling you how to get from one side to the other, what kind of amenities are there. And there is some regulatory signage, but it's somewhat random and sparsely populated. So we wanted to consolidate that so people can use the assets that are there and do so more effectively. More park amenities was another big piece that we're trying to address with this project, but it was another thing that came out of the action plan. More benches, tables, bike racks, just things that people use in a park that make their park experience more comfortable, more enjoyable, and just allows them to engage more in a higher level than what is currently out there. And one big kind of overarching element was making sure that we were respecting the history of the park, the trees. Mellon Park is an arboretum. It is a designated historic site in the city, respecting the open space and the landscape that characterizes the park. So making sure we were identifying improvements for the park, but also respecting what makes it a special place and what makes it a place people go to a lot already. So those bolded items are all things that are kind of considered in the project that we're talking about right now. Moving to the next slide. So when we did the action plan, we identified a number of improvements, and then we kind of parsed them out into different priorities or tiers. And we call these tier one priority projects, were ones that we thought were easily implementable, kind of low hanging fruit, large impacts, were independent of other things, so they could happen at any time. They didn't need they weren't dependent on sequencing of other improvements needing to take place first, and things that were kind of high priority on the community list. So one of those tier one priority projects was to upgrade and enhance existing entrances to the park. The intention being that right now, like I mentioned, the park feels like two separate spaces entirely. So if we can begin to upgrade existing entrances, to do something tasteful, but something that begins to at least visually communicate that both sides of this park are a park, and are the same park, as well as adding signage and amenities, so people can begin to interact with the space better than they have been. It's somewhat confusing now when you go there. So that was a tier one priority project, and that's what we are here today to present to you all and to execute with what we're trying to accomplish. So the goals of this project: one is to establish consistent design language and materials suitable for both sides of the park. Like I mentioned, we have some very historic elements on the south side, a lot of recreational elements on the north side. So designing these entrances in a way that whatever material we use, whatever design language we use, is appropriate and in harmony with both sides. We also wanted to develop a signage package that, again, provides opportunities for park identification, letting you know what park you're at. This is Mellon Park. Wayfinding, so you can find your way from one side to the other or understand what all the different amenities are. Regulation signage that, clearly identifying what the rules are, so you don't need 5 different signs to tell you what's allowed and what isn't. You have that in one location. So developing that and making sure that that's installed on both sides of the park, so it's just very clear on what's allowed, what's not allowed, and how you can interact. Making sure that entrances are welcome, and providing some consistency on both sides. Again, we want to invite people into the park. We don't want them to think that the south side of the park is a private residence or an institution of some kind. We want them to look at it as a public open space, but also being respectful of the history. And then making sure we're providing park amenities and site furnishings to help augment park use. So really, we're looking at new entrances, whether they're plazas, whether they're structural elements, whether those are the things that we've been exploring with our design team, May and Reichel, which I am now going to turn the presentation over to Scott, so he can introduce himself and go through all the things that they've been putting together for you today. So Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it. Good job. And thanks for the overview. Real quick, a little bit. My name is Scott Scarfone. I'm a landscape architect with a firm called Mahan Reichel, and we have been engaged by the Conservancy to assist them in implementation of this first phase of the master plan, which Brandon walked you through. Just a little side note to everybody. This is a special project for me because I actually do have a special connection to this park. A number of decades ago, now I'm dating myself, I actually had an internship with the then once Pittsburgh Civic Garden Center, where I actually gardened in all 3 of the walled gardens. So I'm familiar with this park very intimately, and I'm thrilled to be invited back to help the Conservancy implement this first phase of the master plan. So thank you for inviting me. So we're going to go through what we've developed up to this point. Again, we're going to ask that if you hold questions till the end, we will open this up for questions and circle back on any diagrams that we need to. I'll do as thorough as a job as presenting as I can. But before we jump into it, just to sort of reinforce some of the things that Brandon talked about in terms of having community engagement, as we've moved into this process, we continue that extensive outreach and community engagement. When we did the kickoff to this project, I guess, Brandon, was it in August maybe, or June or July, somewhere late summer-ish? We did a walkthrough of the site with a number of key stakeholders, which include folks from planning, historic Review Commission, Pittsburgh Civic Garden Center, or Phipps Conservatory, excuse me, a number of community folks. So we did kick that off and have input, and we basically walked the site looking at all the entrances together as a team. We also, subsequent to that, have submitted preliminary drafts of the presentation that you're going to see. Actually, what you'll see is a refined version of what was originally presented, but we've also presented this package to the Historic Review Commission, to Planning and Parks Department, and have received feedback from them and have incorporated their points into the presentation, what you're going to see. Not to mention a lot of back and forth with the Conservancy team to refine the design and get it to a point where we're pretty happy with it right now. So we're excited to share that with you. So first, with respect to the signage, we're really working off a set of standards that the city established in 2016. So all of the standards that you see here in terms of the framework of the design of signs, the materiality, the sizes, the different components to the signs, really is a set of standards that's been established by the city from their 2016 document. So we really sort of took those standards and then just adapted them specifically to this park, and I'll get into that in a moment. So you could see the different signs that we're proposing for the park, which are really going to be utilized at different entrances based on the entrance. So we have a tall entry sign, a horizontal entry sign, um, a boundary sign, and different types of signs that we feel will be utilized at the different entrances based on the context. Next slide. I forgot that I wasn't controlling that. This is just a detailed slide that probably most of this group doesn't need to be involved with, but to just let them know that we are working with some very technical signage standards, and these really have to deal with the fabrication of the signs itself. These are specifications that go to the sign fabricator, again, are taken from the open space standards, and will be utilized to manufacture the actual sign panels themselves. Next slide, please. This is a blow up of the sign that highlights the different components that are going to be that are going to be located on each sign. And what's nice about this design, as you can see that the little blocks are established so that depending on the park, depending on the location within the city of Pittsburgh, these blocks could be swapped in and out, yet still maintain the same basic sign. So anywhere that you go in the city, and particularly in the parks, you'll see this same general sign design that is replicated overall. So we worked very closely utilizing those standards, but also getting input from city parks as to some of the components, particularly some of the regulatory icons that you see on there, and some of the rules that you see for the park. Next slide, please. Next slide. You're frozen on us. There we go. This is a slide just to show some of the fine tuning and feedback that we got from parks as we went to, fine tune the welcome message to the park, some of the rules of the park. We really got this from the parks team and incorporated those into the sign itself, including the little sort of little doggy emblem that you see there, with reminding people to pick up their waste and keep the dogs on leashes. Next slide, please. We then worked with both parks as well as the Conservancy to update the map. There was a map that existed. I think there's one on one or two signs that are out there now, but it was outdated. So we worked on updating the map, and depending on the sign location that you're at, there will be a classic, you are here symbol on this map that shows you which entrance you're coming into as you enter the park. Next slide, please. So as Brandon mentioned, in terms of materials, what you see here in this slide is basically all of the sort of circles that you see around the periphery are all materials that are currently in the park. One of the challenges of working in a park that has this amount of history to it, um, the number of elements that are in the park, both historic and new, is you end up with a park that has a lot of materials in it. And so as we started to think about the entrances into each park, we were trying to find a material that was sympathetic to all the other materials, but somewhat neutral so that it harmonized with the materials that are at each entrance, because not every entrance has all of these materials. Some entrances in the historic part have only brick. Some entrances have only granite. Some entrances have cobblestone. Some entrances have exposed aggregate. So there really is a myriad of materials that are at each entrance. So that center image that you see there is a paver that we're recommending be utilized for some of these entrance treatments, these entrance plazas, as Brandon mentioned them. I'd probably would call it a carpet rather than a plaza. Think about it as you're going through your foyer and you have this carpet that's on the floor that you walk over to get into the hallway or into each room. That's kind of how to think about how we're treating these entrances here. So this is basically an asphalt paver that we're recommending. Next slide, please.
And Scott, real quick, if I can jump in
Please,
on this slide.
absolutely.
And the other thing that we're trying to do with this is, there are going to be future improvements interior to the park. There's going to be seating areas, gathering spaces that are intended to be designed and constructed. And what we'd like to do, I think we're using this material at entrances, but also the intention is this is a material that can be repeated elsewhere on both sides of the park. Where some special material, special pavement treatment is warranted. But again, it's that idea of we're setting up the design language for those spaces, for those future spaces that are yet to be implemented. But this is the first step in that process, and we think what Man Reichel has pulled together is, as Scott mentioned, it's sympathetic. It harmonizes with all of these really competing different styles. That is something that's going to be, it's apparent at entrances, but it will be more apparent interior to park spaces as well. So what we're setting up here, ideally, will set up success for future project phases.
Yep. Thank you for that, Brandon. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the elements that will be included at each entrance, will be benches, litter receptacles, and bike racks. They will help provide the appropriate amenities for each entrance, but also help to signify more concretely that that particular space is an entrance. So the site furniture that we are going to be using for the park are again from Pittsburgh City Park standards. The bench that you see, there are already benches in the park that are of this style. There's a couple other ones that are there. Those will eventually be sort of removed and these new ones will be put in their place. So again, we're working from a family of products that is already in the city's catalog, if you will. Next slide. So this diagram essentially shows the entrances that we're working with, the various entrances into the park, and then the red symbol versus the blue symbol. The blue symbol, the circle with the blue ring around it, signifies the entrance that will have a post type of sign, post mounted type of sign. The circles that have the red surrounding them signify the entrances that will have a fence mounted sign. So if you'll notice that the red circles are really only on the south side or the historic side of the park, because that park is entirely ensconced by various types of fencing, mainly wrought iron. And so in those instances, the signs will be mounted on the fence. We've already cleared that with Historic Review Commission. They're okay with us the way we're putting the signs on. The signs that will be attached to those areas will be slightly reduced in scale but will blend in nicely with the fence. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is walk you through each entrance and show you what treatments are going to be at each entrance. We went through a number, just so you know, a little bit of the backdrop and the context here is when we started the project, we really weren't exactly sure how we were going to treat each entrance, nor the scale of the treatment that we were going to undertake. So we went through a couple different reiterations looking at larger plaza areas, smaller plaza areas, different configurations. And after we explored those, we came to the conclusion that really simplicity is best, and something just small um, but noticeable will make the best and most significant impact without destroying any of the character that's out there now. So we're really doing something that is sympathetic, clean, and simple, but yet bold enough to make a difference and announce that this is a threshold or a transition into the park. So we're actually quite excited about it because it's nothing overreaching or over the top. It's very simple and clean. And so typically at each entrance, what you'll see three images here. The lower left-hand image is a site plan, which is more of a construction type of document that shows dimensions. It's as if you're looking down in black and white. The image to the immediate right is that same image, sort of illustrated in color to maybe help visualize that a little more in color. And then, of course, the top is what that will look like in 3 dimensions. We actually took a photograph of each entrance and then what we called photoshopped in the plaza area, the benches, the signage, those types of things. So that really is a fairly realistic representation in that perspective illustration of what you'll see at each entrance. Again, depending on the entrance, there are several common elements. There will be the benches, the signs, the litter receptacles, and bike racks. Not every single entrance will have all of those elements. Depending on the entrance, depending on what we felt the traffic would be, depending on the space constraints, um, those will have the various treatments. So this entrance is into the tennis entrance, if you will, off of Fifth Avenue. Very simple treatment, 5 by 13 sort of paver placemat or carpet, if you will, or threshold with the entrance sign and the bench. Next slide, please. Moving along to the other side of the park, if you will, the Bakery Square, Boulevard, and Sally's Path. Um, Opposite of the bakery place, there's actually an existing bike path that's there. However, Brandon, if you can move your cursor and show where the existing path is, which is dashed in, the existing path does not align with the pathway across Bakery Square. So this is one of the only instances where we're actually realigning the pathway to align with that pathway across Bakery Place. We're proposing a new piano key crosswalk, which would be painted across the pavement, and 2 new entrance thresholds, which again, typical, show roughly a 5 by roughly 13 sort of gateway element or carpet or placemat, if you will, and a bench and a bike rack and litter receptacles. In this instance, we will have both a litter receptacle as well as a recycling receptacle. And the location of those littering and recycling receptacles have been coordinated and ferreted through with DPW. Next slide, please. The next entrance, sort of as we move, I guess, if you will, to the north east, is the other entrance moving towards Penn on Bakery. That actually is that entrance as it exists will actually remain. The only thing that we're proposing there is just simply adding the entrance sign that you see in the perspective illustration in the upper right-hand corner of that image. Next slide, please. This entrance actually was the most challenging entrance to address for a number of reasons. There are some pretty significant trees that you see in the existing conditions or perspective image there that we really needed to stay away from. And by that, I mean we didn't want to intrude into any of the existing planting space that's there now. So we had to kind of work in the framework of the existing paving that was there now coming off the crosswalks across Bakery and Penn. But as we moved into the site closer towards the ball field backstops, we had more of an opportunity to create more of a plaza. And for those of you that have been on this corner with the really excellent and well done redevelopment of Bakery Square, we really wanted to make this entrance someplace a special and a little more identifiable than what's there now. So we created this plaza that sort of harmonizes the entrances that comes together, extended the plaza and created a little seating area because that corner really is activated with lots of people, and a small seat wall to allow for some seating in there. In addition to that, we will be adding a bike rack next to the existing bike rental station that's currently out there. And of course, the entrance sign, which is hard to see in the perspective image, but there it is right there. If you squint your eyes like I am through my bifocals, you could probably see that. So we're excited about this one. This one probably has the most significant amount of improvements that'll be done to it, and it'll really help to improve that intersection. Next slide. Okay, going back over to the historic area of the park, this would be the, I guess, easternmost entrance to Mellon, sort of the low-key entrance. These are not the two major entrances that were formerly driveways. This is a pedestrian entrance. So we're trying to keep things um, in scale, if you will, with the gate that is there. So if you look on the site plan to the left, you'll see a small 5x5 placemat or area rug, if you will, that will have the pavers. There will be a litter receptacle that will be placed right at the entrance. And we know that Fifth Avenue is really not a place that we want to be seated against. It's loud. Um, it's intimidating, it's noisy, just a lot. So instead of having a bench immediately at the entrance, we wanted to pull some of these bench or seating locations inbound into the park to get them off of the main street a little bit and feel a little more comfortable, but yet still have that impression as a gateway. In other words, that bench is close enough to the entrance where it feels like it's part of the entrance and it adds to the welcoming nature of that, but it's far enough back so you're not sitting right on top of Fifth Avenue. Next slide, please. Same general concept for this next entrance, although I apologize, I just realized that our diagram, our site plan, and our illustrative site plan don't align up. So if we can focus on the site plan to the right, this one we're going to have a little more of a grand or ceremonial entrance to really sort of play along with those grand um, pillars and fencing that you see there that was the former entrance drive to the Mellon house. So this really is more of a plaza, if you will, than a threshold. So this paving area will be a little bigger. Those of you that are familiar with this park know that asphalt pathway that runs up to the intersection is in pretty bad shape. So in this instance, we're also going to suggest and remove that really chopped up asphalt paving and replace it back up to the intersection while we're creating this new plaza area here. Same concept with the bench. We didn't want to put that bench right up against those gates or right up against Fifth Avenue. We wanted to pull those back. And again, that is pulled back, roughly 20, 25 feet from the entrance, but still visible enough to make it feel like it's part of the entrance experience. Next slide. And this here is the easternmost entrance. Again, the secondary driveway that comes up. A little challenge on this one just because the way the grade works. But you can see we're having a small threshold there. One thing I failed to mention is the sign that we're going to have on the fence. If Brandon, if we could circle back on that backslide just for a brief moment, I want to point out you could see the sign there that'll be fence mounted to the right of the main entrance. So it really does blend in nice with the historic fence. The gray tone is nice, and it really does feel like it belongs. So fast forward again to one more slide. And again, you can see the same concept of how that sign is attached to the fence. Again, it announces the entrance to the park, and it'll be a "You are here" kind of thing. Fairly simple entrance. And again, same concept with everything along Fifth Avenue. A bench at this entrance, but it's not right smack at the entrance. We want to pull it back. There are some grading challenges here. This is really the only flat spot that we can put the bench. It actually works out pretty nice there. One thing also, again, I did fail to mention is at each of the entrances on the historic side of the park, we're proposing 2 flowering trees to again further help enhance and identify that as a gateway or an entrance.
And Scott, one thing too about in regards to mounting fences on signs is if you go to the park today on those historic fences, there is regulatory signage mounted now. And as kind of mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, a lot of that is done a little bit haphazardly. So the intention is let's clean this up instead of having a bright red, keep your dog on a leash sign. Those rules can be stipulated as well as other park rules on these city standard signs, which, as Scott was pointing out, much more tasteful, blends in a bit better. And these can be mounted to that historic fence in a way that doesn't damage it, can be easily removed. And as we discussed, we've talked about this preliminarily with HRC, and they thought that was a reasonable approach to this, that it marks the entrance. It's very clear that this is a park. And it does clean things up a little bit and gives respect to the historic elements that are there.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that color. And also just one more thing to add to that too is that the way that the sign mounting is done, we're not going to be damaging the existing wrought iron fencing at all. So if at some point in time in the future those signs want to be removed, other than maybe some paint fading or something like that, there will be no damage done to the wrought iron fencing at all. If the way the brackets are mounted, they kind of wrap around the existing pickets and no damage at all. So moving over to Beechwood, the 2 entrances here again, this is the sort of southwesternmost drive, which is the existing drive that goes up to the, um, I still call it the garden center, but I guess the Sky-Fi house, right? Um, that will be treated. There is existing asphalt that is there now, in between the existing concrete sidewalk and the gates. Those will be removed, and the paving will be in and put in place. Again, just in the part that is exterior to the fence. We will not be doing the special paving interior to the fence because we didn't feel that it was necessary. And on this entrance, we will be having the litter receptacles and the trash cans off to the right. And then on the left-hand side, we'll be having bike racks and benches. What's nice about this on either side of whether it's on Fifth or Beechwood, is really fundamentally you can't see what's going on inside of the park in terms of the benches or the bike racks or the trash receptacles. The fence really does a good job of sort of camouflaging them. I mean, you'll still be able to see it, but if you're driving down the road on Beechwood or on Fifth, you're not going to be able to see those elements from the street side. So in terms of maintaining the integrity of that historic edge, we're doing that here. Next slide. Same basic approach on this entrance. Again, the second entrance off of Beechwood. We're enhancing the entrance only between the existing sidewalk and the existing fence, just enough to signify that this is an entrance at someplace special. And inbound to the fence will be the litter receptacles, the trash cans, which, by the way, there's a trash can in that current location now. And then the bench inbound, as we did on the Fifth Avenue side, and the flowering tree again to announce that entrance. And you can see what that looks like in the image there. Next slide. At the entrance to the active recreation side, or the north side of the park, this is the main and only vehicular access into that side of the park. Currently, there is a wood sign there that's not very attractive and I think just poorly done. That will be replaced, and this metal panel sign will be put in its place.
And I'd just like to note, I think on the next few slides, we recognize that this entrance is intended to be completely redesigned as part of the action plan. That being said, we felt, going back and forth with Scott, that some upgrades to at least signage and some of these next entrances make sense. The reason being is, coming back to do work in the future, it's very easy to relocate a sign and put it back in. What we didn't want to do is invest money in pavers or any kind of more formal entrance treatment that's just going to get ripped up 5-6 years down the road to accommodate another project. So this is kind of recognizing, the fluidity of trying to implement a master plan or an action plan. Some things have to be temporary,
Phased in, right?
But that's, I think we wanted to address some immediate concerns with some temporary fixes and address some permanent concern, some other concerns with some permanent fixes. So these are kind of intended to be those temporary fixes, but again, it signifies entrances. It begins to communicate what we're trying to communicate on both sides of the park. So
right.
Go to the next slide. Thanks, Scott.
Yep. So this is the Penn and Fifth Avenue entrance. Brandon, correct me if I might be wrong, but I don't think this was identified in the action plan, but we decided through the course of this project that it needed a sign. And so it's just going to be a simple sign panel that'll identify this entrance.
Yeah, correct. The action plan identifies creating a brand new entrance at that actual corner of the intersection. Right now, if you were to at Fifth and Penn, you can't get straight into the park. You kind of walk down, pan a little bit, and then hook in. So this was an attempt to at least provide that, that signage, that information as you come into the park, but recognizing that further down the road, we are going to put an entrance at the corner of Fifth and Penn, and this sign can be relocated to that location when that project happens.
Okay, next slide. So here we have Fifth and Shady. Just again, a simple sign to announce this corner that's actually Mellon Park. As you drive down there now, there would be no way that you would know that this was the part of the park. So again, just a simple sign, easy to maintain, simple announcement. Next slide. And then two other areas that we added to the project that we felt would be important would be at the walled entry garden. This will be coordinated with the enhancements that are being done to the garden center by Phipps Conservatory. So the exact location of this is still under flux. We will be coordinating that with Phipps Conservatory as they evolve their plans for this entrance, but it is an entrance and should be signed. And then at the comfort station, you can see there on the left, again, horizontal sign on this one. So we selected the signs that we felt were appropriate for each entrance. And here's an example side by side that shows one that we think the horizontal sign is best located on the comfort station sign, and the vertical sign is best located on the walled entry sign. Next slide. And then the last slide, and then I'll throw it back to Brandon and we can open it up for discussion or questions. And Brandon, I'll rely on you to facilitate that, but chime me in when you need me. These are two construction sections that just kind of show the materiality that are options. The top left option shows how the unit paving would be done. Everything would be done over a slab of concrete to help increase its durability and maintenance long term. The other option is the exposed aggregate option. We started out looking at these at multiple entrances, mainly at the entrances along the Bakery Square side of the park, because There's a lot of brand new sidewalks that just went in on the new development that use the exposed aggregate. So we wanted to try and be sympathetic to the overall context of the urban environment. There will be a little bit of exposed aggregate used on that side, but not much. And then we talked about that single brick wall that will be used on the Bakery Square and Penn Avenue side. This is a detail that we'll be using for that wall, which essentially mimics the brick walls that are done over on Bakery Square. So again, trying to be sympathetic to the urban context of that particular area of the park and blend it in with the urban surroundings. Because it's not a historic side of the park, we didn't feel constrained by historic materiality, but urban context was more important there. And so that concludes my part of the presentation. I'll be available for any questions. And Brandon, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Yeah, I think that's the overview. This is what we've come to present, and we'd love to hear what people's thoughts are. If you have questions, concerns, happy to answer that at this point. I think I can now see the chat. So we have a comment from Dave Fine. Nice job with bike racks and benches. Is there an opportunity to create bus stop infrastructure that welcomes bus commuters to the park as they get off the bus? Something that ties the bus stops to the park. Yes, and I think that type of infrastructure. There's two bus stops in particular. There's the one, I think it's right at the entrance to the parking lot on the north side, and then there's another bus stop farther up on Fifth Avenue as you get towards Fifth. As part of this project, we're not proposing any immediate improvements to that. The one at the parking lot entrance, we're holding off on doing any major improvements because that parking lot, the intent and the action plan is to actually kind of completely reorient it and make some pretty major infrastructure improvements to that piece of the park. So we didn't want to do any kind of immediate changes in that area that could get disrupted. The other piece towards Fifth and Penn, the action plan did identify actually trying to create a small entrance into the park interior pathway from that location. That one we are going to start working on. That's another project the Conservancy is getting ready to kick off this year, is to actually do some pathway and entrance improvements and lighting improvements along kind of the Fifth Penn corridor, the pathways that are there now, as well as trying to make a direct connection to the corner of Fifth and Penn and an entrance in there. So that's something we can address in that project, but very, very good points and well heard. Larry, you have your hand raised, and then I'll go back to the chat. I think you're on mute.
I had a couple questions. One is the total cost of the project and where the funds came from. And the other comment I had, if I don't get too confusing for you, is there are some other very significant safety factors, especially at the Fifth Avenue entrance where Beechwood comes in as you enter to the parking lot, that street light, the traffic light, gives you a okay to cross, yet traffic from Beechwood is turning into you. So is there a coordination between what you're going to do and what the city's responsibility would be to make that intersection safer? Along with that would be the road from Beechwood up to the garden center is in terrible condition, and you have a lot of that cobblestone that's in terrible condition. So between the work that Phipps is going to do and the work that you're going to do, it's going to be glaring that the city needs to do some additional work.
All good points. So to answer the first question, in terms of how much this is going to cost, we had budgeted, I believe it's $170,000. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, for construction. We have not done a cost estimate for what this is going to cost yet. One of the benefits of a smaller approach in terms of some of those entrances and the materials that we're using is that might give us some more construction funding to do things like Scott mentioned, on one of the entrances where the paving is very bad. It doesn't make sense doing this brand new paving treatment just to walk into deteriorated asphalt. So that's part of what, kind of the next stage of design is we're going to identify what those limits are to at least do some repaving where it makes sense. To your point, I think, this is coordination we have to do with the city. But if we're investing a little bit and Phipps is investing a little bit, that might make it easier for the city to also come along and invest a little more too. They're kind of ramping up their park tax program, so that's something that we can continue to coordinate with. I can't speak to it directly. I don't know if they have plans to do any paving improvements elsewhere in the park, but it's something we can certainly continue to try and coordinate with.
But Brandon, let me just jump in real quick and correct me if I'm wrong, but right now, this project is solely for the entrances and the signage. This is the first phase, the first project identified in the master plan. So there's definitely more work that will need to be done in the park in the upcoming years. And the master plan is actually very well written. And I think as the Conservancy continues to kind of work their way through the master plan, I would imagine some of those other areas will be addressed. But for this particular project at this point in time, the focus is on the signage and the entrances, meaning the paving and the site furniture and amenities. That's what this project now is focused on.
Correct. Yeah, that is our immediate scope. And we will, to that point though, we are in coordination with the city. We continue to coordinate. We continue to find opportunities to advance the action plan. So to the point about traffic signals, the action plan advocated for turning that, actually all the signals on the intersections connecting to Mellon Park to be have a pedestrian only crossing phase, and those are things we're going to continue to push for in our conversations with council persons or DOMI or whomever. I think there's a couple things in the chat. I'm going to jump to the chat, and then I know there are some hands raised too. Let's see. Is there adequate lighting for the signs to be seen at night? Depends on where you are. I think you will probably be able to see them along 5th and Penn. I think the street lighting is fairly adequate there. Unsure of some of the interior park signage. There are parking lot lights on the north side of the park, and on the south side of the park, there are parking lot lights there too. I'm not sure if they're always functional. So at least definitely there is some ambient light, but as mentioned earlier, lighting improvements to the park is something the Conservancy is already trying to push forward on different phases of the project, and is something we'll coordinate with the city as well. Wondered about the gate being removed on the Beechwood entrance. Can you explain the reason behind that? I don't believe we're proposing to remove any gates. They might just be left open.
Yeah, none of the gates are being proposed to be removed. They're all going to be left open the way they are currently right now.
I can just, it might, if it's these entrances, it might just look like they're not there.
Yeah,
that
they're
might just be
there.
the angle of the photo. Yeah, we're not going to remove any. Those are historic. We're not touching them. We're letting them,
right.
we're letting them stay where they're at. You considered a sign at the entrance of the parking area on Shady Avenue. It seems to be a popular place where people enter the park and where the park begins. Yeah, that's something we can consider. This is part of a larger conversation, and we've had some coordination with some discussion with Phipps Garden Center, as well as Center for the Arts and Media and City Parks, who are in the SCAIF building and the Marshall Mansion, respectively. Why it's a broader conversation is we want to announce that there's a park, but we also want to give wayfinding to those buildings. Are we calling them the SCAIF building? Are we calling it Center for the Arts and Media? It was a bit of a larger conversation that sort of went beyond the scope of this project, but I can say that those are things that we are considering and going to continue to have conversations about advancing either between ourselves or Phipps or some of those other entities, is especially like what we're calling the campus area. How do we improve signage and wayfinding between those areas in a way that makes sense? We didn't want to start putting up signs that called it the SCAIF building, only to find out that nobody calls it that, or that's confusing for Center for the Arts and Media. So think that's why we kind of kept it to just some immediate entrance signs and calling out some general things. But some of those more detailed conversations can and will continue. Will the cobblestone eventually be removed? Accessing from the, I'm assuming the parking lot behind Phipps Garden Center. I do not believe that cobblestone would be removed. I would have to double check Phipps plans for the garden center renovations, but I believe that cobblestone is intended to stay in place. It is not accessible, but it is historic. And I do believe Phipps is intending on providing an accessible sidewalk from that entrance into the heart of the park. Someone link us to the master plan. Thank you, James. Will any of the signage convey the historic designation status of the park? That is a good question, and we can ask DPW how that wants to be done. If that is something that would typically be conveyed on a park sign in park standards. There's another portion of this signage conversation that can in terms of interpretive signage, that again is beyond the scope of this project, but it is something that future projects could partake in. Are there opportunities for interpretive signage in the park that could convey historic relevance of the park, its historic designation? I think that's a valid point and something we could consider moving forward. Is there any signage planned for the gap in the fence between the east and west parts of the south side? I think I'm assuming this is in regards to the fence that runs kind of north-south that comes off the back of the walled garden and runs down. So it looks like the part is separated. Not yet, and part of the reason is because the action plan does propose punching a hole in that fence with a pathway actually connecting you from the corner of 5th and Shady into the interior of the park. So ideally that would help convey that in fact is part of the park and it won't need to be signed. And that's why we're hoping that the Mellon Park sign on the corner would help convey that this is all part of the same parcel and not necessarily separated. And we have some hands raised. Jenny, were you looking at the order of raised hands or is there only still one?
I think just Jennifer.
Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thank you. This is very detailed, and I appreciate the adding the benches and trash receptacles. The trash, have you considered changing the position of trash receptacles at the entrance to the North Park opposite Beechwood, the entrance that goes into the parking area? There's just a lot of trash there, and there's one, only one, and it's behind the bus shelter. You see it right there to the right of the white car.
Yep.
Yeah. Perhaps putting one on either side where people walk. There are two further into the park.
Sure.
Actually 3, but they're near the entrances. There's only that one behind the bus shelter.
That is a question we have not considered that as part of this project, but that is a question that we can ask DPW either as part of this project, or is there a way to provide more trash cans in a bit more accessible locations? To see either we can do it or DPW might have the ability to put some trash cans elsewhere where there's a high need. So that is something we will put on our to-do list to ask and coordinate on. Thank you. Checking the chat. Are there any hands up?
Nope.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts or questions? Get up the chat right now. Overall, very pleased. Thank you. So next steps for this project. We are, as Scott mentioned, we've been coordinating with Historic Review Commission, but that is in a kind of an informal staff to staff level. So we will be submitting for a certificate of appropriateness because this is a designated historic site. And ideally, we will be on the agenda the first week of February to present this project, to make sure that HRC has given approval. And then we are off and running to get through the permitting process and advance this to construction documents. The goal being to put this project out to bid sometime this mid to late summer, and get construction rolling and wrapped up by the end of this year. Scott, does that schedule still?
Yeah,
true?
August, I'm just looking right now. August is where we have slated for bidding. And then construction, please don't quote us on this, but is on the current schedule for September. So that depends on how quickly the procurement process works, and we could get contractor staged. I could tell you right now, contractors are incredibly busy right now. So asking them to mobilize in a month might be really difficult. So we're hoping that construction starts in the fall of this year.
Excellent, thank you. So, yep, we have our work cut out for us. Thank you all for participating in tonight's meeting and providing feedback. If there is anything else, any other questions, comments, concerns that come up, feel free to reach out to us directly. Jenny, do folks have easy access to our emails?
I emailed everybody the link, so if they wanna.
So yeah, you can either contact Jenny. I will also point out that we have updated. There's a tab on the city's Engage PGH website under the Mellon Park Action Plan page for this project, where we can be posting. We'll be posting updates as the project progresses, but also contact information is there as well. So feel free to reach out to us if there's anything else we should know. But other than that, thank you all very much. We appreciate your time and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening and
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year.
Thank you.